Hello and welcome to the Gambling Files podcast, the podcast that's brought to you by platinum sponsors Clarion Gaming and Optimove. Oh, I didn't quite nail it. I'll try that again in a minute. Now, I'm still not quite there, but I will get there. I'll try it again in a minute. I'm one of your hosts, John Bruford. I'm joined by your co-host, Mr. Fintan Costello. Fintan Costello, hello.
Hello, John Bruford.
Hi. Have you heard any good jokes lately?
I have.
Is it the one that I told in the Mel episode?
No, it's about a Jewish dad. And I just want to make sure I get it right.
Okay.
So, Jewish dad's got teenage son. Teenage son goes off, Dad, I'm leaving home. I'm going off on an adventure. Comes back a couple of years later and says, Dad, guess what? I've converted to Christianity. The dad's a bit shocked and like, why, how, whatever. And he was talking to another Jewish dad friend of his and to explain what happened with his son. That Jewish dad turns around, yeah, you'll never guess what. Same thing happened. My son went off backpacking, came back a Christian. Wow. Another Jewish dad, same conversation. And he's like, guys, you'll never guess what. Same thing. My son went off, came back a couple of years later, he was Christian. Eventually the dads are talking to God and they're explaining what's going on. Like, you know, the sons go off, Jew, come back Christian. God looks at them and goes, guys, you'll never guess what happened. That's the joke.
What happened?
Come on, John. If I have to explain it, it's rubbish.
I'm going to have to listen to this episode so that I can go back over the joke.
Well, you know, Jesus was Jewish and became Christian, or whatever, however that worked. But effectively, he was Jewish. So that's the joke.
Oh.
No?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not as good as my ant joke, though, is it?
What's your ant joke?
That's on the Mel episode.
I can't remember. Okay, I'll have to listen. I clearly tuned out when you're talking.
Oh, dear. So,
It's been a long day.
nobody sent in... No, I don't think anybody sent in a sighting of the Merch in the Wild.
I've actually been pretty lax on sending it out. I've got a backlog of stuff I need to ship to guests, but it's okay. I'll do it all on Friday. I've got time Friday. Just power through it.
Okay.
Mugs for everyone.
I don't want to add to your, because you are very busy and still very important. You've lost none of your relevance in your sabbatical.
Don't be ridiculous. It's like, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah, I've got a pretty good story about that, which I need to tell you when we stop recording. Yeah, it concerns some people that you don't want to anger. And there's not many people I describe as that. Normally, I quite enjoy making people angry.
Talking to people we don't want to anger.
Yeah.
Big shout out to our sponsors. They're awesome.
That's a good shout. Yeah, we don't want to piss them off because they would crush us like mites.
No, they're too nice for that. They're too nice for that.
No, I think they'd crush us. I think they would be...
vengeful.
I was going to say Old Testament. Fitting in with the theme of this episode, I think. Yeah. I think there would be Old Testament gods and they would be stoning us, basically. Which, yeah. So, no, but our tremendous sponsors, Clarion Gaming and Optimove, obviously they're very different, but they share a key similarity in that they are both giants in what they do. Clarion Gaming, of course, organise the ICE Expo and Conference, which all eyes are now looking at Barcelona 2025, including Fintan's
Ole.
and
Ole.
Optimove, CRM, online CRM is
iGaming CRM, AI driven, super smart, super scalable. They deal with most of the top operators in the world. But they've been doing it for ages. They were doing AI before it was cool. They've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah. Even before Spielberg thought it was cool, and Kubrick.
Yeah, just go book a demo.
But one of the other things is that these businesses in sponsoring a little podcast like this, towering colossus of a podcast, obviously, but also a labor of love kind of podcast. When you click the links,
labor maybe.
Sadly, yes, it's Labour under Neil Kinnock in the 1980s. We're never getting into power. No, it's when you click the link in the show notes, they do see that it's come from us. So please give it a click and have a look.
It's a data-driven company. They track everything.
They do.
Definitely click the link. Definitely mention the podcast. Definitely book a demo. And keep Fintan in floor varnish for another year. That's all I need.
Yeah, because he loves getting high off that shit.
I don't know if I'm getting used to it or it's fading away. It's hard to tell. I think I'm getting used to it.
Yeah, lean closer to the camera so I can check your pupils. Dear God, you're fucked. I've been watching too many episodes of Casualty.
That's why I'm hungry. I'm like, I'm going to go get a pastry after this.
Yeah.
Oh, cinnamon rolls sound great.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to go buy some glue. This episode, we welcome back Charles Cohen from the Department of Trust. We thought it'd be a good time to get Charles on because of the resurgence of interest in affordability checks in the UK space. Now, obviously, it sounds as though it's a UK-centric episode, but actually, in terms of sort of onboarding and retention and data, I think this episode actually has relevance for every market. It's not just a UK thing. It's just that's where the UK is right now.
Yeah. But the open, so it's really interesting. So Charles, for me, has always been a fascinating person. Because there's, in ice hockey, they talk about, there's the famous quote in ice hockey about, don't go to where the puck is, go to where it's going, or move to where it's going. And I think Charles is a great example of that in the gambling industry. With the stuff he's done in the past with, he was doing mobile slots long before anybody else. And now it's just it's the normal. Super, super smart guy. And I think what he's doing with using open banking and the affordability checks and he talks in detail about it's more about vulnerability checks. I might be getting the wording wrong there, but he's gone through the process of getting FCA licensed, which is arduous. The product they've built is excellent, very, very consumer centric, but also makes it very easy for the operators. And I think it's real, when we had him on, I think it was ages, at least a year ago, if not longer.
Yeah, it's longer.
A long time ago. They've been doing some really, really clever stuff for a long time now. And the what's interesting also about the open banking is like the Netherlands is introducing a raft of restrictions. More and more European countries are introducing these restrictions or getting tighter on regulation and player protection. And I think a product like this, given EU open banking rules, is actually very, very scalable outside of the UK. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity in this space. So I'd just be fascinated to kind of cheer them on and see what they end up doing and what kind of giant they are. Anyway, so I think there's some really, really cool stuff coming out of Charles and the team. And I love the branding as well. Department of Trust is just a great name. That's
It
just
is.
such a good name.
It's a really good name. I hope that one day they come on board as a sponsor, and I'm the reason I'm saying that is because it's really easy to evangelize about stuff that's really good.
That is true. That is true. Which is why it's easy to have Clarion and Optimove as sponsors too, because
I see what you did there.
Yeah, I'm good, right?
Yeah.
Or Athletic Greens, if you're listening. I do take your supplements. That'd be great.
Or Wagnall's Farm Butchers. I do eat a lot of your meat. But it's true, I do. So Charles Cohen, Department of Trust, affordability checks, UK centric, but ramifications for everywhere. Have we missed anything out? Mention the sponsors.
There's a bit of video game nerdery.
Oh shit! Yeah, there is, isn't there? Ludlow nerdery.
Yeah, bit of coffee chat as well.
Yeah, coffee chat. It's a good call. Coffee snobbery chat.
Yeah, I've been looking up those pods he recommended. I'm going to go buy a box at the weekend. I'll give it a try. So.
Fucking hell. You breathe different air to me. I'm like...
I do.
Yeah,
literally different air right now. It's
your air is way better than mine.
It's very fumey, flammable.
If you didn't listen to the previous episode this week, Fintan is currently inhaling solvents because he put some stuff on his floor.
I've been sealing my concrete floor, and it's mistakes were made. the extractor fan does nothing. Everything tastes like burning right now.
Nice. I see you've come back to The Simpsons again. It tastes of burning.
The goggles, they do nothing.
It's
That's my favorite Simpsons quote.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Or perfectly using the amount of times I use the word cromulent in a sentence is ridiculous.
Oh man, I'm going to have to think of my favorite Simpsons quote now. I know my favorite one to say, but it's not necessarily my favorite quote.
I failed English. That's impossible. Every time my wife corrects my English, she was critiquing one of my LinkedIn posts the other day about like all the spelling mistakes I made, and I tried to blame. Must have been the autocorrect.
Must have been the fumes. There's an episode where the community has to fill in at the school because teachers go on strike or something, and they get the old dude with the beard.
Oh yeah, that's a bad one.
That's the one. That's the one. He's just standing there with his paddle. Beginning class. That's a paddling. I love that, and I've used that one with the kids quite a lot. But not so much now. It's illegal in Wales, obviously.
But in my head.
Yeah. In my blissful dreams. So on that note, Mr. Charles Cohen, Department of Trust.
Enjoy.
Well, we're very lucky here on the Gambling Files, not just because we enjoy each other's company so much. Fintan. But because we're blessed by a succession of excellent guests. Some of them are new to us, some of them are returning guests. Our next guest is a returning guest, and he's very nice. I'm not sure that I need to say anything more about that. If anybody is watching this on video, I'd like to also point out that my radiator is perfectly in focus and I'm blurry. So let's thank heavens for small mercies, shall we? We're joined by Department of Trust founder and CEO, Charles Cohen. Charles, ever been tempted to form any other departments, or are you happy with just Trust?
I would have formed the Department of Coffee, but that I was in that very coffee shop when I had the idea for calling it Department of Trust. But that's my only other interest in life.
Well, I have to ask then, what's the coffee machine? What have you got going on?
Well, in this office, it's one of those horrible Dura machines that kind of produces brown hot water.
But what have you got at home? What's the real coffee
At
at home?
home. What haven't I got? I have currently got I use these little espresso. All I drink is espresso.
Yep.
Anyone who knows me knows this. And I found this amazing, they call them ESE pods. And they're basically espresso like tea bags, but they're
Okay.
compressed. And so you put them in your espresso machine and it produces a perfect espresso with no mess.
So you're using it on a portafilter and you're putting it into the portafilter.
Put it in a regular filter. It's really good.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's
all the really bonkers Italian brands make them. So I buy them from some guy in Germany and smuggle them across the border.
Ooh, but luckily nobody's listening. Interestingly, in the tiny, tiny town, backwater town that I'm in, there is a little coffee shop where they roast their own beans and do all of that jazz. But they also have a working partnership with, I think it's a Venezuelan grower. And so they get all of their beans from one place. So it's like a single origin place. It's not a blendy thing. And they also sell them on Ludlow Market if you should ever happen to be in South Shropshire wanting coffee.
I think that qualifies it as not being a backwater if you can buy your single origin, locally roasted Venezuelan coffee beans.
It definitely is a backwater. It definitely. I'm not sure how it could be more of a backwater. I mean, there are
Ludlow
like
used to be a big. Didn't
No,
Ludlow
I'm
used
not-
to be
I'm
a
not
big
in
centre
Ludlow.
for the video games?
Now you're talking. But I'm not in Ludlow. I'm in Prestine over the border in Wales. I'm from Ludlow. But yes, so Roger Keane and Oliver Frey had video games magazine publishing companies, and that's where I started my working life.
We should talk about that. Crash Microgaming.
Crash was an institution, and you can't go anywhere in video games without meeting people from Ludlow as a result. And there's a little blue plaque up on their old offices as well. And Zap 64 was the other big one. But I joined them when they set up Impact magazines, which was around the Super Nintendo console time.
Right.
And everybody that works there says the same thing, even to this day. And this is like 32 years later. Best job I ever had. And really sadly, it was a business that was taken down by the financial officer embezzling. It was great and great people, and it was just going to work with your mates and having an awesome laugh every day. It was fucking awesome. But Roger and Ollie, yeah, Roger died last year, and Ollie died about 5 or 6 months before him, unfortunately.
It's really odd though. Like, you know, as a kid or whatever, as you're young, you see these like magazines, like, oh my God, working for this magazine would be brilliant, the best job in the world. And then usually like it's some sort of grueling sweatshop where everybody's abused or whatever. So I think it's really unique to hear one of those like childhood dream jobs. Somebody say it was actually as good as you think it was. It was brilliant.
Oh, it was way better. It was fucking brilliant. And I'm still friends with almost everybody I was working with there to this day. I mean, there's a few people have died, unfortunately, Roger and Ollie particularly. But yeah, most of the people that I worked with there were, you know, as I've always said, and I said this to Robin Harrison from IGB, because Robin's previous life, if you like, was as a chef. And I've always likened working in magazines to working in professional kitchens, because you basically make enemies for life and friends for life really fast, because you're in this non-stop pressure, and you learn a lot about how to get on with people and how to epically piss people off. And it is really, really similar. But how old are you, Charles, if you don't mind me asking?
54.
Okay,
so I'm that
you're
first
exactly
ZX81 generation.
Yeah, exactly the right age to remember Crash, etc. Here's a cool thing about Roger and Ollie, and one of my favorite things about them, right? So Roger's. Roger had a. God, what would he have been? Cousin, I guess. Who I worked with, a guy called Will Evans. Will, far and away the most talented writer I've ever worked with, and you can't disprove that because he's dead. And Will,
There's a theme developing here.
Well, and a common property in all of this. But Will said to me the one day, because when they were doing the Spectrum and the Commodore magazines, they did a horror magazine as well called Fear, and this would have been mid 80s, so 80, let's say 85, 86. This was going around the time Hellraiser was made by Clive Barker, which still stands up as a terrific movie. And Barker, because he was featured a lot in the publication and got to know Roger and Ollie, I believe, he gifted them. Do you two know what Hellraiser is? I'm pissing in the wind here. Okay. So it's got this puzzle box that when you manipulate it a certain way, it opens the door to another dimension with these S&M creatures, basically. And they were gifted one of the boxes. And I never bothered them about wanting to see this box, even though I totally wanted to see this box. But a friend of mine in Ludlow is a huge horror fan, and I contacted Roger and I said, "Would you show my friend Jules this box?" And he invited us round, and we spent ages round there. And he just pulled this little wooden box out, and it's just a lovely memory. They were just such good people, and the impact that they've had on everybody's lives, incredible.
But when you open the box, did it actually open the portals to hell?
That is a great question, Charles. And turns out that they made, I think it was 6 or 7 boxes for filming. And only 3 of those boxes moved in whatever way. You know, they all did different things. And they had one of the static boxes, so no hell portals, unfortunately.
What a shame.
No. I think they were disappointed. But yeah, Ludlow, yeah. But it's still a backwater because it's still in the arse end of nowhere. Just because posh people live there doesn't mean it's not a backwater.
Has it got a Waitrose?
No.
Oh, well, then it really is uncivilized.
Did get a Sainsbury's a couple of years ago.
No, doesn't count.
No, the nearest Waitrose is 30 miles.
That's a long way.
It is.
See, I think when we're running affordability checks, distance from a Waitrose is clearly a leading indicator.
No, what should be an indicator is your Waitrose loyalty points. It's not just being close to Waitrose, it's being how much do you use the fucker.
Yeah. Actually, Waitrose has now been supplanted by Gales. If you've got a Gales, then you know you're going up the income scale.
What the hell is Gales?
Right, well, there you go. You see, you're both living in completely the wrong places. It's a chain of ridiculously expensive bakeries.
Oh, I know the one. Okay, yeah. I know the one.
Yeah.
Okay, because I tend to live in places where bakeries exist because they're an essential rather than because they're a luxury.
Nobody needs well, maybe they do need a cinnamon roll. But the £5 bowl of porridge, that's really going some.
Yeah, because it's got so many expensive ingredients, porridge.
Yeah.
What is a fucking gold spoon or what?
Snobbery costs a lot of money, let me tell you.
Well, I think anybody that's listened to this podcast before will know that I do not know what you're talking about regarding that. I'm happy with my working class roots and, well, present situation. But Charles, we did actually ask you here today to talk about things related to the gambling industry. And I feel we should probably head down that path at some point.
I'm sure that's probably why people are listening.
So why don't we start at the beginning? So obviously you're a returning guest, but we're significantly bigger than the last time you were here. So maybe a quick overview of Department of Trust and what you guys do, and then we can jump into the UK situation.
Yeah, sure. So
it's a good idea, that, Fintan.
We're 100% focused on the gambling industry. So me, Michael Byrne, the team all come from the industry and could really set it up. What was it now? A couple of years ago now, with the idea that we could develop technology and apply things like open banking to solve the problem of undertaking all of these affordability and financial risk checks that, well, it's sort of had started, hadn't it, during COVID, and it really kind of became embedded. And then there was the white paper that was published, and now we've had the consultation. And yesterday, the day before we were recording this, there was a debate in Parliament, and it's pretty clear that checks are coming in. So the idea of Department of Trust is very simply to provide a mechanism that allows the checks to take place as efficiently as possible. That's really it. So we started out with open banking, and as of yesterday, from the time of recording, we are now officially, finally, are authorized by the FCA to connect directly to the banks, which is brilliant because we're like the first gambling-oriented company to get this, which is quite something. They really put us through the ringers, and actually learned quite a lot of interesting stuff that's quite useful for the discussion about financial vulnerability for gambling. And the open banking is going to be pretty much the only way to go for the sort of the very high end checks where operators are being asked to get proof of income and make sure that somebody really can afford pretty high levels of spend. And for everything else, what they call the frictionless stuff, we've built a platform now that does all of that with public data and databases and all that kind of stuff, so that it takes place without the consumer knowing that it's happened. So that's what we do, and we're really good at it.
Well, that's good, because I was going to ask that.
Yeah, if you score yourself.
I'm out of questions now. I've got nothing now. I'm out of questions.
Okay, so all right, so it's and I think myself and John, when we first spoke to you about this, the open banking integrations and these kind of things was, I think the big selling point, and obviously there's been more companies kind of joining this market since we spoke, but it really kind of felt like, well, look, we can solve affordability pretty straight. Like the technology is available now where we can solve affordability without, sending in copies of bank statements or doing these kind of things. So there's the technologies that, and obviously there's a lot of negativity in the press, and there's a lot of like, it's going to destroy the industry, it's going to destroy horse racing, everybody's going to go offshore. Based on your experience, are people, are consumers or gamblers, are they willing to go through these checks? Is it something that's happening? Is it as bad as people are making out, or what's your kind of sense?
Okay. Well, we have one operator that's using the system, and they're a very reputable operator. They have a good relationship with their customers. They're getting over 90% connection rates, which means for every 10 people they ask to share bank data, 9 or more are agreeing to do it.
Okay, so that's huge.
It's huge, and it's really interesting because they've worked very hard at refining the process, and we've got a couple of operators at the kind of similar levels, there are, I guess, it's like any other CRM activity that goes on in an operator. There are good ways of doing it and bad ways of doing it, and as you learn what works and you refine it and you keep trying it, you get better and better and better. But the point is that if it's done well, there really is no significant consumer resistance.
Wow.
I'm absolutely blown away by it myself. I really didn't expect it to get that high. I mean, we pumped a load of investment into building a system that scans bank statements, because obviously there are some people that just refuse to use open banking and just want to use bank statements, and it's great, but people just prefer to use open banking because why wouldn't you? It's like 2 clicks, and as long as you trust where the data goes, and the people that are going to see it and how it's going to be used, it's the easiest way to get back into placing your bets.
Which intuitively makes sense, and I think it's one of those things where there's like a very theoretical debate happening in the public space, and then there's the reality of, well, look, here's what the data actually shows.
So I'm not. I think it's not just. It's not entirely theoretical, because the way that a lot of operators have approached this up until now has been very much send us your bank statements, send us your wage slips, and they've been doing it because they've kind of had to do it at relatively low levels of spend, right? And that is very, very intrusive, and I think that's why open banking wins, because it is just so much more efficient, and the customer is still in control of their data.
Yeah.
They're not just sort of scanning their bank statements and sending them off on an email somewhere. It's really a much better experience. But it has been very, very challenging for operators who are getting, 9 out of 10 people saying no when they ask for that information, because, why would you bother? You just go to the next guy.
Yeah, that is definitely a. But ultimately, I suppose because it's not. Sorry, I'm just thinking through this, because it's not a single. It's in terms of affordability checks, it's per operator, not total for the industry, right?
Correct. And if you're the sort of person that's going to hit a disclosure threshold at one bookie, you're very likely to be the sort of person that hits it at another one.
And you're also the sort of person that has multiple accounts anyway. So the logging in and depositing somewhere else is frictionless too, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, our approach, which is, you've people have different approaches to this. We kind of set ourselves up as a third party between the operator and the player.
Mm-hmm.
So once the player's connected their banks to us, if that customer then goes to a different operator that's using us, we've already got the data, so the player doesn't have to go through that process again.
Yeah.
And that has its strengths and weaknesses. Other people are doing a process where you have to connect your banks each time. So it's a bit like, every time you go and register for an account, you've got to give your name and address and your date of birth. It's a bit like having to do that. And, I'm sure that works in some circumstances as well. Because it's not really that onerous. Unless you've got 10 different bank accounts and you've got to select which accounts you want in each one, because you've got your business account and then you've got this pot and that pot, which most people don't have. They've got like 2.5 bank accounts. So I think the average. It's really not a problem. And, open banking now is pretty robust. They've done a lot of work on it to make it efficient and fast, and all the banks are basically under an obligation to provide it. So, people are just getting used to it. Okay,
so that's super positive. But I think it's like you said as well. It's how you communicate it. It's how you present it to the customer. So it's not just it's a tool, but how you use the tool is super important. So with everything happening so obviously the UK, there's things are afoot. This week we've been talking to Mel Ellis about the slots limits, so the £2 stake, £5 stake, and now there's obviously the big push on the frictionless affordability checks. So what's changed, and what do you think is going to happen next?
So nothing's changed, which in a sense is news, because there's obviously been this campaign by the Racing Post and the horse betting, and I think a bit of a rearguard action by the BGC to either slow down or stop the checks. And as of the Westminster Hall debate and the Tim Miller blog, it's clear that they are going ahead with it. So in a sense, that is a no change. I think if you stand back from it, the thing that's really going to change is that operators are going to all be given very specific objective points at which they have to carry out certain types of financial risk check. Okay, and that's different because today it's ad hoc, right? And actually, I think this is one of the problems because the kind of show me your bank statements checks that people have been undergoing up until now have been pretty random. You didn't know when you were going to get it, and so when you did get it, your first question is, why are they picking on me?
Yeah.
Right? Because I could have lost the same amount of money with another operator and had absolutely no inquiry whatsoever. Yeah. So there was a sense that just because you're being asked, it's somehow an accusation.
Got it.
Whereas under the new system, everybody is going to know what the rules are. Okay. So there is a very basic minimum threshold. You might be asked for an enhanced check if the operator looking at a frictionless check thinks that actually there might be something burning in the kitchen. But it's not going to be a complete random selection like it feels today. And I think that's really the most profound change here, because everything else in terms of what checks are run when, who does what with it, those are all sort of practical details that will get worked out. The key thing is that if you lose X over Y, period, depending on your age, the operator is going to undertake some kind of check.
So is there situations then where there's actually checks are going to happen less free? So some operators you would imagine then are maybe being very strict with the interpretations, and others maybe being a little bit more relaxed, because there's different, every operator's approaching it in a different way with the new rules then. So there's situations where if everybody kind of course corrects then to the new rules, then actually it's going to be easier for some operators and then harder for other operators.
It will be, but I think the main impact is going to be on the, I don't like this term frictionless because it's very confusing for people, but let's call them the passive checks versus the active checks. So the passive checks are the ones that are undertaken without the consumer needing to know what's happening. By definition, that's not really going to affect people unless those checks are coming back with a negative, at which point the operator is going to have to intervene.
Yeah.
Those checks are currently happening. Some operators are doing them at registration, some of them are not doing them at all, and everything in between. Those are all now going to be done at these defined net loss levels. The important and interesting stuff is at the active end, which is where people are going to trigger the higher loss, the higher risk thresholds. So that's what they call binge or sustained unaffordable gambling. So essentially it's a much higher level of spend. Those are the ones where you're going to have to dig really into the person's financial circumstances to identify whether they're financially vulnerable.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that people find offensive because they're the ones where they're randomly being asked for their bank statements. And that will be set at very specific points, and people will know when to expect it. Now, some people, I'm fairly sure, will keep tabs on it, and they will go, right, I'm not going to bet anymore with this operator, because if I do that, I'm going to have to go through the vulnerability check, so I'm going to go and move my business to this one, and I'll come back to these guys in 90 days. Right, that might well happen at the margin. But I think for most people, that point, they'll go through an open, most likely it'll be an open banking check. It'll take them 30 seconds. They'll get a clean bill of health. That's it. They're done for the next however many months. And then it actually is quite interesting because then it becomes a loyalty tool for the operator, because the regulations are going to say something like you don't have to check somebody again for a certain period of time. So if I know as a consumer that I have been passed clean by an operator, then I've got X number of months where they're not going to.
Which would make sense of like, I don't want to go through that again, or have to do it. So it's easier just to stay. Now that I've passed, I'm just going to stay here.
That's right.
And
that's right. And I'm sure that operators will wake up to the opportunity here of this, and certainly some of the ones that we're working with have figured this out, that actually, there's something really good about this here, that it's building a relationship with the consumer that is actually based on mutual trust. What I call the adult to adult conversation rather than the adult to child, which is what we pretty much have right now.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Okay, so yeah, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So it's coming. There's tools in place that can solve it. So then one of the big arguments against it is you're telling people what they can and can't afford, which will turn off a certain percentage of the population. And then I'm just thinking this through. So the arguments against it is people won't like it. They're going to go to the black market and it's going to kill horse racing. Like that's kind of the two or three arguments against it.
Yeah, although they're linked, those arguments. So I think there's a little bit of there's another way of looking at this, actually, which I think is probably a more positive way of looking at it, which is let's stop calling them affordability checks. And actually, the government doesn't call them affordability checks, and I find myself in agreement with them. The job is to spot people who are financially vulnerable. Right now, that is a completely different ask than working out what someone can afford, in quotes, because what someone can afford is a judgment call.
Yeah.
But there are objective tests for financial vulnerability. And in many ways, they're similar to markers of harm for problem gambling.
So what are the tests for the financial vulnerability?
So the FCA defines four tests or factors, right? One is what they call capability, which is can the person does the person understand their finances, right? When you're looking at a product, you're going to take a loan or something. Do you understand what the interest rate means? And in the context of gambling, where obviously we're not selling financial products, it's more about is this person aware of their financial circumstances, right? Is this person capable of actually making a rational choice to put 500 quid into a betting account? And the example I always use, and I've seen this in the data that we've got access to, is there's a big difference between someone that puts in their last 500 quid because they're hoping to win £1,000 so they can pay the rent in 2 days' time, versus someone that's just got paid and has got some cash and decides to punt 500 quid. Right? From an operator's point of view, it's the same £500. Yeah, so a financial vulnerability check is about finding that person who's financially vulnerable from spending that money. So it's not about the amount, it's about the context. So that's one test.
But that's really hard to do, though, right?
No, not if you've got. So you've got two ways of doing it. In a frictionless level, what you're looking for is signals that this person's finances are in a bad way. So you're looking for CCJs, you're looking for credit defaults, you're looking for signs that the person's really not in control of their bank balance, right? And when somebody gets to a point where they're kind of regularly defaulting, or they're building up large volumes of credit, those are signs of financial vulnerability.
Got it.
When you're talking about the other end of the spectrum, so you've actually got access to the bank data and it's been assessed. I mean, obviously you've got very granular information; you can see everything, and it has to be. That's why it has to be handled so carefully and sensitively. But identifying vulnerable customers is a commitment, is a requirement on all companies that are regulated by the FCA, regardless of what activity you're doing. So that's how it's interpreted for this. So that's capability. The second one is resilience, which is pretty straightforward. Have they got any cash? Like, can they afford? It's the broken boiler scenario. So someone who has low financial resilience is financially vulnerable because if the boiler breaks down, they can't feed themselves because that's going to take all their cash, right? And we know from what's been happening in the last year or two with inflation that there's a lot of people who are skating on very thin ice. The other two are more difficult for a gambling industry to relate to. One of them is what they call adverse life events. So essentially divorce, bereavement, that kind of stuff that creates a massive disruption in someone's life financially. From a gambling perspective, I think that'd probably be a very difficult topic to get involved in, probably not really relevant to the industry. And the other one is long-term health. So if somebody's sick to the point that they can't work or they have very expensive care, and that damages their ability to manage money or to make ends meet, that makes them financially vulnerable. Right. So the way that the white paper and the consultation and the minister approach this is that they keep talking about identifying financially vulnerable customers. They don't really talk about setting levels of affordability.
That's super interesting,
right? And
because
I
that's
think
so more nuanced than what you're saying.
It is, I think that part of the debate has been influenced by the fact that originally they were referred to as affordability checks, and they were undertaken in the same way that you go through an affordability check before you get a mortgage, right? And that just really isn't. I mean, apart from anything else, each operator, unless you're going through the open banking and the person has agreed to share this information, you don't know what that person is spending at other gambling sites.
Correct.
Right. So setting an affordability level is always going to be hazardous, and really your job is to find somebody who looks like they might be financially vulnerable and then act accordingly, right? And that action might not be, I'm going to shut you down. Yeah, it might be something completely different, like providing some support or some advice, or it might just simply be limiting deposits.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be binary, and I think operators are going to come up with all kinds of kind of risk-based approaches.
Will they be allowed to come up with? Because obviously, can an operator interpret the rules like that and come up with solutions that isn't a case of stopping? Hey, we limited his deposits to 200 quid.
Yeah. So I think that if this goes like other sort of similar types of regulation, then there'll be the license. The LCCP will be published, and it will lay out what the operators are going to have to do. It probably won't be very, very specific.
Yeah.
So it will be a bit like it is with AML, and at the moment with the sort of general duty of care that operators have on customers, is that they're going to have to develop policies and say this is the data that we're looking at these levels, and this is how we respond based on these criteria, and we consider these to be reasonable and effective, and we've measured our performance against this, blah blah blah, and it'll be exactly like it is. If you're using a behavioural system like Necton or Future Anthem or something like that, and you go, okay, I've identified markers of harm on this player, and that's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, and having just been through this whole FCA process, that's exactly how it works in the financial services industry as well.
Interesting. So, okay. And then, because I suppose it's one of those challenges with the way this industry operates, that if it's not prescriptive and it's open for, it's kind of that kind of open for interpretation, you're then going to have a spectrum of responses.
Sure, but you have a spectrum of customers and you have a spectrum of operators. A high-end bookmaker who takes very large wages from a very small number of kind of actually professional gamblers is going to have a totally different profile to a mass market bingo site.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, that's a very good point, but I think, I'm more thinking about there's going to be somebody who tries to drive a bus through a loophole and gets away with it until they don't. And then it becomes, regulation through the issuing of fines rather than just putting it down on paper.
I think that would be a shame if that's what happened.
But it will.
But it might do. I think that...
And we could name the companies right now.
Maybe not.
It's going to take a bit of time, for sure. And there is going to be a pilot. So that the interesting thing about the pilot is that it's really looking at the data rather than the outcomes. And it's going to take time to figure out how to, what best practice is for outcomes versus the inputs. But I think that the important step is this standardization of when it happens, because what that allows is a direct comparison between operators.
Yeah.
Right. And if you've got an operator who is running the same checks on similar profile customers, and they're flagging 50% of them as financially vulnerable, and you've got another one that's only flagging 1% of them as financially vulnerable, they're probably both outliers. But at least the commission is going to be able to gather the data.
Yeah.
And presumably they'll publish it, right? And they'll be able to say, or they'll communicate it through the inspections and say, well, look, I think as they do at the moment, we kind of normally expect 80-20. You should be looking at, if your risk assessment says 99% of people are fine, then it's not a really good risk assessment.
Yeah.
And I think that happens at the moment on some things.
Okay, that makes sense. And it'll be probably 90-10 rather than 80-20 because that matches the profit, where the revenues come from anyway.
Yeah, I mean, what people won't be able to do in terms of driving buses through loopholes is they won't be able to mix their metaphors. They won't be able to avoid doing the assessments at all, right? Because it's going to be absolutely cut and dry. If a person loses X, and the definition of loss will be in the LCCP, I think they're talking about net spend effectively of an amount X over period Y, then you have to do assessment A, right? And that there's no choice. The really interesting thing is what you then do with the result of assessment A, and that's the bit where it's going to have to be hammered out through practice.
Okay, that makes sense. So basically what you're saying is it's a golden time to be a provider of checking software. It's a glorious age that will never end.
It's gonna be good business for some people, for sure. Hopefully us, but at the end of the day, no one benefits from this unless it works in the interests of the operators and the consumers alike.
Yep.
Right. And you can have all the great technology in the world, but if it doesn't help, it's going to go. It's going to be gone.
If it does help, and it does all turn out to be absolutely brilliant, then just
remember
not linked to the conversation we've been having at all. But podcast sponsorships are available.
I mean, it's going to be interesting. It's not going to be like the US with the geolocation stuff, with those that
that gold mine.
I mean, it was amazing, amazing, and I hats off to them both. Really, they really did an extraordinary.
Oh my god!
Thing. But
my favorite business.
There is a lot of there's a lot of complexity in this space. There's a lot of people in the space, ranging from the classic GB groups all the way through to us, Challenger Technologies and open banking and all kinds of things. I'm expecting there to be a lot of innovation over the next couple of years, all geared towards this one goal of making it as easy as possible right, and making it effective.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah, it's going to be super interesting. My money's on you, for sure. I think it's the travel up direction. So yeah, you
Thanks.
guys are doing some great stuff.
Thanks.
So brilliant. And congratulations on the FCA approval as well. I'd say that was a very long, arduous, difficult process.
The
Yeah,
Fine Coffee
you know,
Association.
the Flying Coffee Association, they actually hilariously say on their website that it takes three to 6 months. It took nearly 2 years, and apparently that was quick.
Really?
Yeah. Well, in the middle of it, they introduced this consumer duty stuff, which basically reset the clock to the amount of work you have to do to demonstrate how you help vulnerable customers. Because it's really extensive.
And they wouldn't put you guys through something like their sandbox kind of thing because look, it's gambling, it's new, they need to figure this out as much as anything.
No, the sandbox didn't really apply because we are using established open banking protocols.
Got it.
All right, we're not doing anything super duper new in that sense.
Got it. Okay, so you're just treated like every other bank,
every other sucker,
every other urchin.
Yes. Yeah, that is quite something. I mean, I really, yes, I did that. There were some times where I wonder why on earth I'm doing it, but it's worth it because having the direct connections to the banks is essential for this kind of thing because it's just about it's a trust and confidence issue, I just felt that without it, we were only ever going to be at someone else's mercy in terms of connections.
Well, that's because it makes it easier for the operator can be reassured you've got the FCA approval. The consumer can be reassured you know what I mean. It just kind of ticks so many boxes.
Yeah.
And then if you can control the tech, then it's your roadmap, not somebody else's roadmap.
Yeah.
Which we both know is ultimately the right answer in this industry.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's the only way to succeed. So that's it's a huge win. And yeah, that's really cool. Excellent. Yeah, that's all my questions. Jon?
Oh no, he did my questions. I was just going to ask if they're any good at it, and he said we're very good at it. So I'm good. I mean, I'm a little disappointed that the latest season of Cobra Kai didn't land at the end of last year when it was supposed to. But Charles, you got any thoughts on that? How do you feel about Cobra Kai?
It's not really my thing, but I'm a big Slow Horses fan, and they film it downstairs from where I live.
No way.
They do indeed. And can I put in a plug because my wife is a qualified, licensed walking tour guide for the City of London, and she does a Slow Horses tour.
Oh,
if you're interested in seeing all the places where Jackson was rude to people,
I would love to do that.
Yeah. SquareMileSecrets.com.
I haven't seen the third series yet.
It's very good.
I'm very much looking
reading the
forward to
books. Square Miles Secrets. Sorry, I'm just Googling it now.
You can just make a note of it and come to it after we... No, never mind. You crack on, Fintan.
No. Got it. Okay.
Give him some SEO tips. No, it's it's fabulous series and extraordinarily funny. And not in a really obvious sort of way either. So
and ridiculously well cast as well.
Yeah.
Really well
some serious talent in it. I was watching this movie the other night, and it was so shit that I had to carry on watching it because a movie being shit isn't always a reason to turn it off.
So you want us now to ask you what movie it is, but I think both Fintan and I basically just don't want to know.
No, I wasn't even gonna. There's not a chance in hell you'd have heard of this movie. But I was messaging with with a mate, and because he'd already seen it, and he'd been like, "Oh yeah, that's really shit." And I'm like, but I don't understand how they got all this talent in the movie. I mean, it's so many talented people, including the dude from Slow Horses who dies halfway through series 2, I think.
Spoiler.
The guy that gets hit on a bike. Remember him?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, him.
He's,
yeah.
Right.
He's good.
So
When was it?
he's
Yeah.
very prominent in this movie. And there's like Johnny Vegas. See, so it does have a gambling link. And a bunch of very pretty well known British actors. Mackenzie Crook is one of them. And it was made in 2019, but it looks as though it was shot on a video camera in the 1980s using a 1980s microphone that was kept in somebody's pocket. It's that bad. It was really awful. And I was just sitting there thinking, how did they get all this talent involved in this film? And it was a writer-director movie as well, so I think it was a first movie. Made on a very, very, very low budget. And when the credits rolled, I realized how they'd gotten the talent to do it. Because basically all of the people that were cast in it got to direct the segments of it which told their characters' backstories.
Oh.
It's like, come along, show your directorial chops, etc. It was fucking shit.
It's a bit
God, it was
self-indulgent, isn't it?
Oh, it was so bad. So bad. And it's like this, I don't know quite how I'm making this leap, but I am. But it's like, so I read a brilliant book for young adults or sort of pre-teens-ish. I read it with the kids. And it's it's a murder mystery set in a London housing estate. Phenomenal book called High Rise Mystery, I think it's called. It's fucking excellent. Obviously a very talented author. But sometimes when you get those very talented authors, and Stephen King is very much guilty of this. So it's not just people starting out. They don't edit them quite as arduously in subsequent books. And the second book in that series is so riddled with mistakes, it hasn't even been proofread, never mind edited. And it feels a bit like that. It feels like, oh, got all these talented people involved, so we don't need to edit this. We don't need to use any quality controls. Mackenzie Crook, it's got that bloke who's going to be in Slow Horses in 3 years, etc.
Well, wait for
Stephen
it because
King
it's
needs a
not
fucking
long.
editor. Sorry.
It's not long before people you get books that are half written by AI. That then you're going to see some real drivel.
That's already happening. It's a huge issue on Amazon.
But I don't think with that I don't think we've not had that. If you look at the way that James Patterson and there's a couple of other authors, like huge named authors, who have their co-writers. I mean that feels similar to the whole AI thing to me. It's like, you got your name on the front of the book, but you've had fuck all to do with this.
Well, you could train the AI on the, so if you just upload all of Patterson's books into your own little custom thingy, and then you give it the outline of a plot and have it do the first draft of, write the book in this style based on these books, and you could probably do it.
It's all Andy Warhol's fault.
You think?
Yeah, he invented that whole thing. Well, he didn't really. I mean, they did it in the Renaissance, didn't they? You had studios with the Grand Masters and all the students actually producing the work, and then they just put their name on the end of it. And then Andy Warhol did it in the factory. It's nothing new.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just really annoying, though.
It's annoying to you because you didn't think of it.
No. I wouldn't do it. There's integrity is an important thing, and it's an extraordinarily valuable thing. And it's just not worth swapping for money. Really isn't. But I did probably told this story on a podcast before, but I was a famous author called Harlan Coben, and I read his original series of books, which I enjoyed tremendously. And I actually wrote to him and I said, really enjoying the series, keep up the great work kind of thing. And he wrote back and it was all very pleasant. Then one day I'm in an airport and I see one of his books that I've never spotted before. And in airports, they sometimes do airport exclusives and shit like that. And I pick up this book and I jump on a plane and I start reading a book, and fuck me, it's the worst book I've ever read. And I'm not exaggerating. It was fucking terrible. And I believe it recognized that it was shit in the it was either a foreword by the author or a postscript by the author, in which he said, "So what you've just read was my first ever attempt at writing a book, which I dug out recently and thought you might find it interesting." And so I had to email him again and say,
I'll take it all back.
"That's all well and good, but put that on the fucking front cover or put it for free download on your website. Don't make me spend £8 on it and be stuck on a plane with only one friggin' book, and it's that pile of shit." And I haven't actually bought any of his books since. No, weirdly, he didn't. He seems to like the praise, but not the criticism. Fucking lightweight twat. Honestly, I've not bought a book by him since, and I haven't watched any of the adaptations either. Fuck you, Cohen. Anyway, I'm not a bitter or angry person. Fucking Cohen twat. Charles. Thanks for joining us. Next time I'm going to be at an event that I know you're at. I'm going to bring you some Venezuelan coffee from Wales.
Thank you. And some Harlan Coben.
Do you know what? I haven't got any. And I'm delighted. He's called the Master of the Bait and Switch. But I think what they really mean is he's a masturbator. I think that's what that sentence really means. Fucking bastard. Sorry. I shouldn't be this angry about it so many years later.
It's really not worth getting angry about.
But I felt so cheated. I felt so cheated. And for what? For his fucking ego to be... what's a publisher doing indulging a writer like that? What is the point? What's the gain for a publisher? It makes everybody look bad.
It was your £8.
Exactly. Bastard. Anyway, thanks for joining us on the Gambling Files, Charles Cohen. It's been our pleasure again. And
it's been good.
Now's the time to buy shares in Department of Trust. Are shares available? No, just kidding.
No.
It's because Charles has got them all. Okay. Thank you very much, and see you soon. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Gambling Files podcast, please find us on LinkedIn. Give us a big, juicy, succulent like. That nearly went wrong. You can find us under the name The Gambling Files Podcast. You can find us on Twitter under The Gambling Files. I think the handle is just @GamblingFiles. You can connect to myself, John Bruford, or Fintan Costello, also on LinkedIn. We're also both on Twitter. And you can find all of our previous episodes at www.thegamblingfiles.com. If you enjoyed it, please share, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues, and we'll see you next time.